Othello responds to the implications of Iago's somewhat kind of sideways interjection in this conversation. This doesn't follow a kind of logical call and response, this dialogue. It's Iago being given kind of free rein to cultivate this sense of uncertainty that he is such a master of creating in Othello. And Othello just says, "Oh, misery," this full, sort of immediate, wholehearted acceptance of Iago and the way he sees things. Iago goes on to say, "Poor and content is rich and rich enough, but rich is fineless is as poor as winter." And this section of the text borrows a really complex grammatical and rhetorical structure called a chiasmus. It's very simply where you have a grammatical structure before a turning point that mirrors the reverse of the grammatical structure after the turning point. So one of the most famous ones is from Macbeth, where it says, "Fair is foul and foul is fair." That very clearly has a sort of A, B, B, A verbal structure. And this one is, I would say, more complex, and it involves the word poor and rich. Poor and content is rich and rich enough. Rich is fineless as poor as winter. So there's this reversal of poor and rich and poor in this sort of opening part of the sentence. And this chiasmus, I think, the purpose of this is to invert the notion that emotion is some form, emotional wealth and happiness is of some sort of value. That's the key point that I think it attempts to subvert. And it's only the case where it is certain, but this is obviously some form of impossibility. So the lines themselves, to be poor and content is a type of wealth, and wealth enough. But riches fineness, which means limitless riches, being in that state is as poor as winter. And obviously there's a simile within this construction as well here. So being impoverished in some way and content is a type of wealth. And notice he's extending this metaphorical verbal pattern of talking about the states that we value. He's talking here about contentment now. But limitless riches are as poor as winter. So what we hear then within this is that subversion of the way, the inversion, of the way that we normally evaluate emotional wealth. That being simply poor and content is a form of wealth. So being unhappy but content in your unhappiness is actually a form of wealth, in contrast to having limitless riches that become as poor as winter. And I think within that line is a suggestion that, again, it's playing on Othello's insecurities. He knows that his relationship with Desdemona almost is kind of too good to be true for someone in the position that he finds himself in. I think Iago deliberately provokes that here, that he sees his relationship with Desdemona as a kind of riches fineless, as limitless riches. To him that ever fears he shall be poor, to someone who worries about the loss of these fineless riches, they then become poor. So what we see then is that this, just doubting the loss of something, is the form of poverty. So we see this in the parallel to Othello's feelings for Desdemona. Just simply having doubts about her robs his relationship of value and his emotions of their intensity. So again, Iago has immediately, just by describing this state, carried out the linguistic intent of the lines, whereby Othello is being robbed of his emotional intensity for Desdemona. Well, of his positive and romantic emotional intensity. And I think here, one of the important things to take of this is that this is actually an impossibility. We can't ever really be certain about our riches in various forms, our wealths, so to speak, lasting a long time. So Iago is playing a really kind of complex linguistic game here and tricking Othello through these complex grammatical structures into seeing a logic behind his explanations that is actually kind of, when we look at this in the cold light of day, kind of transparently not there. That there is no real, I would say, timeless positive certainty that we can afford to invest all of our positive feelings in, because they are all changeable and liable to loss and transformation. He finishes by saying, "Good God, the souls of all my tribe defend from jealousy." Now, there is, in this particular case, a type of dramatic irony involved here, because we've heard him say this before. The souls of all my tribe defend from jealousy. We've heard him say this in Act 1, Scene 3, line 353, where he self-identifies as a kind of diabolical and demonic being by calling himself as a member of all the tribe of hell. And yet here he echoes this line in this passage that is supposed to be kind of presented to us as some kind of state of his sort of humble acceptance of I guess a kind of Spartan emotional state of putting up stoically with a lack. Here he uses this language to make himself sound kind of moralistic and almost kind of pious and stoic, when really he's not. And the souls of all my tribe defend from jealousy. Again, this echoes the language that he uses on reputation in this whole passage, because that we've seen above, because it robs happiness of value and poses a threat by virtue of humiliation. So again, this whole passage here echoes the previous one through its financial metaphors, and by doing so shows us the way in which, according to Iago, we can consciously choose where we channel value. And that here he's arguing with Othello about, he's almost preparing him verbally for the loss that he is about to experience. But by doing so, he is creating that loss itself. So his language is what's creating the prophecies that it describes. A little further on, Othello responds finally in a wholehearted way, in an intensive way. He says, Why is this? Thinkst thou I'd make a life of jealousy, to follow still the changes of the moon with fresh suspicions? Here, I think Othello has been provoked. His sort of masculine pride has been provoked here by Iago. And I think he resents this insinuation that his life would become a kind of whimsical, changeable for a succession of doubts. Iago has managed to provoke a sense of authority and male pride in Othello with his insinuations that somehow, not only, will Othello find out the truth, but he will be crippled by that sense of changeable, unreliable uncertainty if he begins to doubt Desdemona. And he can't handle the suggestion that this makes about his character, someone who sees himself as a powerful military general, can't be reduced to this sort of suspicious, insecure, blubbering mess. But notice that there hasn't really been any discussion about whether the reason for this jealousy is true. It's simply discussion around the subject. It's discussion about the event as if it's an inevitability that of course she is cheating on you. There is no dialogue about, well, how do you know? What facts have you got to prove this to me? And what this reveals to us is Othello's own sense of inadequacy and his own sense of insecurity, that he immediately jumps to the conclusions that Iago points him strongly in the direction of. So, in this demonstration of male pride, he says, no, to be once in doubt is once to be resolved. And that's a linguistic paradox, I think. To be once in doubt is to be once resolved. If you are in doubt, you can't suddenly be resolved. But I think what he means is, as soon as you have doubts, you should resolve to end your relationship and your positive emotions towards that individual. But I think, again, it warns us about the illogical nature of the conclusions that he arrives at. Once in doubt is to be resolved, because that is all then Iago has to do. Iago has to engender a sense of doubt, and that is precisely what he does. And Othello is quick to get to the point where he feels resolved, where he feels certain about the decision that he's made. Exchange me for a goat when I shall turn the business of my soul to such exsufflicate and blown surmises. Effectively what he means is to such windy and empty and hollow suggestions that are almost spat out with the breath. matching thy inference, matching what you're implying. 'Tis not to make me jealous to say my wife is fair, loves company, is free of speech, sings, plays, and dances well. And I almost get the sense as you say these lines that as Othello is delivering the lines, he gradually realizes the implications of what he's suggesting, that she's attractive, she loves hanging out with people, is liberal in the way she speaks and sings and plays and dances well. She is a catch. She is attractive in all these different ways, and it's almost as if he then finishes this thought with this assertion at the end, where virtue is, these are more virtuous. He has to force himself to attach these abstractions, this abstraction of virtue once more, to the way that he makes sense of Desdemona. But again, a lot of these skills that he's clearly kind of identifying in Desdemona also echo the qualities of femininity that Iago criticizes in the misogynistic verse that we see where he rhymes in couplets cryptically to Desdemona when she first arrives on the island. So there is, I think, within that verbal echo, a suggestion of Desdemona's kind of promiscuity and her fulfilling these promises that Othello almost doesn't really know that he's making here about her promiscuity. This particular verbal construction, where virtue is, these are more virtuous, of ending clauses or sentences with the same word, is called epistrophe. And I think it attaches a sense of virtue to the behavior, of signs to morality, but it amplifies the reverse. When we say where virtue is, these are more virtuous, the reverse is simply where virtue is not there, these are even more, sort of unvirtuous or damned or corrupt in some way. So by using this intensifying grammatic structure, where virtue is, these are more virtuous, it attaches behavior to signs of morality, but actually in doing so amplifies the reverse position. And what we don't know, he doesn't conclude that she is virtuous. So we there have this suggestion then that she is more corrupt than he realizes. The smallest fear or doubt of her revolt, for she had eyes and chose me. She says, nor from mine own weak merits will I draw the smallest fear or doubt of her revolt, for she had eyes and chose me. So I think here, this suggestion of drawing the smallest fear is both creative and almost like a form of monetary transaction again. I will draw from my bank account. I will draw fear or doubt from his own weak merits. He's aware of the fact that this is going to rely upon the way that he sees himself. But the fact that he's immediately in this position of defending the way he thinks reveals that he has drawn a fear and a doubt from his own weak merits, from his low sense of value in himself. And this, I think, begins an obsession that follows in Iago's speech with vision, the way we choose to see things. For she had eyes and chose me. She chose what she could see. Now, he finishes off here with a very complex piece of rhetoric. Know, Iago, I'll see before I doubt. When I doubt, prove. And on the proof, there is no more but this. This is a type of rhetorical structure called anadiplosis, where you begin a following sentence or clause with the word that you ended the previous sentence. So you said, I'll see before I doubt. When I doubt, prove. And on the proof, there is no more but this. So there's a sort of a chain-like sequence to the verbal connections between these clauses within the sentence. And the purpose of this, I think, is to show a sense of logical certainty that is ironically missing from his thinking in the case of his doubt. There's this very logical sequence of steps that this verbal structure presents to us. I'll see before I doubt. When I doubt, I'll prove. And then on the proof, there is no more but this. Away at once with love or jealousy. Sounds like a very reasonable series of logical steps to go through. But of course, this is not what happens. Because his eyes deceive him. He says, she had eyes and chose me. But his own eyes deceive him. The way that all the characters see themselves in this play is unreliable. And that really all that he requires here to go into this state of frenzied jealousy is doubt. He never really receives what he demands for the ocular proof. Othello manages to convince him of this through a little bit of gossip and a handkerchief, basically. He does very little. Iago responds, "I am glad of this, for now I shall have reason to show the love and duty that I bear you." Of course, this opening statement again is another ambiguity. The love I bear you with franker spirit. There's an implication here that he hasn't been honest. As much as he loves this word, he hasn't really been honest. He's now going to show all the love and duty that he bears him with honesty, with a frank spirit. Now, it's worth remembering that this actually does function as a sort of honest declaration here. He is about to show him the love and duty that he bears him, i.e. zero. He is in one form telling the truth here, as he actually possesses no sense of love and duty, but again, he invokes these abstractions in order to keep Othello on side, to keep him believing in Iago's integrity. He moves on to say, "Therefore, as I am bound, receive it from me." He has managed to convince Othello that the provocation of jealousy is part of his duty in some way. I am bound, receive it from me. So this idea in this section is that he is bound by duty and honor to imbue Othello with this sense of jealousy, but really he means to give him the information that he's trying to avoid giving him. But he's managed to turn this duty, this hollow abstraction, into actually the guarantee that it will create this sense of uncertainty and jealousy in Othello. He knows that Othello will buy into this explanation that he is honor bound, he is duty bound to communicate this doubt to him. He says, "I speak not yet of proof." So he admits that his reasoning is kind of feeble and a bit weak. "Look to your wife, observe her well with Cassio." There's again a kind of a polyvalency or ambiguity about this. It can mean watch her closely, observe her well with Cassio, but also the sense of inevitability. Watch her well with Cassio. Of course you're going to see them together. And also the suggestion of her happiness in Cassio's presence. Watch her well with Cassio. Watch how much she enjoys being in Cassio's presence. Wear your eye thus. And this phrase here, wearing your eye, can mean both to look very carefully into something, but also to dissemble, to wear your eyes in a way that doesn't display who you are honestly. So he's now conjuring up this sense of dissemblance and sort of demanding that Othello begins to think this way in his pursuit of the jealousy that he's encouraged. Not jealous nor secure. So this is the sense of uncertainty and ambivalence that he clearly criticizes at the outset, that jealousy itself embodies. He says not jealous nor secure, but that the tension between these two structures creates that sense of uncertainty that he is so desperate to avoid in the outset. "I would not have your free and noble nature out of self-bounty be abused." So there is here a triumph of cynicism over abstract virtue. The irony is that his cynicism is just as much of a kind of unreliable sham as the abstractions that he criticizes. Your free and noble nature again, this optimistic, idealized way of understanding Othello's role in society could be abused out of self-bounty. So here cynicism triumphs. And the sad truth of this is that the cynicism that he is encouraging in Othello is just as much of an unreliable truth in Iago's version of events, in the way he embodies that cynicism, as is the abstractions that he so freely criticizes. Look to it, and again, you'll see as you look through this passage, the number of words that are connected to. There's a semantic field to do with vision. Observe how well, your eye, look. This pattern that reminds us that this is a play about the way that we choose to see things, the way we choose to observe human interaction, and the way in which we understand the way that people interact with each other, and the way that they place value in certain things. You think of the constant tension between investing human interaction with abstract value and seeing it for the kind of nakedly selfish competitive pursuit that Iago seems to believe in, those different ways of seeing. He invokes this, and this is what Othello ends up demanding. Give me the ocular proof, the proof of vision. I know our country disposition well. In Venice they do not let God see the pranks they dare not show their husbands. They do let God see the pranks they dare not show their husbands. So he's, again, inciting his suspicion here by saying, hey, I know what these Venetian women are like. They are quite happy to do certain things. They just don't want their husbands to know about them. So it emphasizes that dishonesty is occurring, particularly in Venetian women. And this echoes this early description of Desdemona as a super subtle Venetian, when he talks about the unlikely or the frail vow between an erring barbarian and a super subtle Venetian. He's bringing up and bringing to mind again that implication that Venetian women are in some way untrustworthy and promiscuous. Their best conscience is not to leave it undone, but to keep it unknown. So there's a loss over morality. There's a loss of morality over what can be seen, and it criticizes women for adopting his own approach. Their best conscience is not to leave it undone, but to keep it unknown. This is precisely what he's doing, but somehow in this particular passage, he's managed to convince everyone that it's the fault of women rather than himself and individuals like him who see the world in such cynical and amoral terms.